In addition to that, my dear brothers and sisters, in addition to this nafs, there is what? Shaitan, isn't it? You are all Muslims. And Shaitan, is it a fact or a fiction? It's a fact. If we say it's a fiction, that's a statement of kufr. Has anyone seen Shaitan? Maybe never. So if you are of the individuals who believe only on that which is called the ilm kasbi, empirical knowledge that has to be demonstrable in the laboratory, then you are still living in the hissi world, the world of the infants and the world of the cattle. Forgive me. For even good scientists know better. Because once upon a time, science used to believe that there was only classical world, and only classical laws and only classical physics. And until they discovered and they acknowledged the existence of an inner world called the quantum world, their knowledge of physics was incomplete. They realized that there are certain laws in the classical world that don't work anymore at a deeper world. Strange. Empirical science fails at a certain level. Classical empirical science fails at one level. And they had to acknowledge the existence of quantum physics, though some early scientists did not accept that, including Einstein, who said God does not play dice, because in the science of quantum mechanics there is a lot of statistics as well. That was his notion. But until that world, that, if you will, that hidden world that did not operate in accordance to the classical laws of physics was acknowledged, that we learned of the physical world better and more things. So there is a world out there that the hiss does not necessarily perceive, and that there is other knowledge that perceives it and that understands it. And that Shaitan is part of that. And Shaitan knows that the most prized possession or the most prized trust of ours in this universe is your qalb and mine. Shaitan knows that the most prized trust and possession in this universe for a human being is his or her qalb. And therefore, he has made it an oath, as you know. He had made it an oath, as you know. To endeavor and to struggle to occupy that qalb. To occupy that qalb. And occupying that qalb is done in ways enhancing, cultivating, and developing in you and me the three lower states of the nafs. So that the qalb side directed towards the nafs captivates only that much. The side of the nafs that is reflected in the qalb is the lower three states. He does that incessantly. And when we follow those states of the nafs, we follow our shahawat. That is our, if you will, shahawat in this sense, figuratively speaking, that is our lower desires, because shahawat, the plural of shahwa, is positive or negative. There is positive shahwa and negative shahwa, but usually the ulama, when they use the word shahwat, they mean the negative aspect of shahwa, such as the characteristics and the vices we mentioned earlier, like miserliness, like greed, like anger, like love of this dunya, like love of leadership, and so on and so forth. Injustice, etc. And Shaitan wants to occupy that qalb by doing that, and he knows what the gates of that qalb are. Remember, by developing those lower three states. And in other words, in more simpler terms, the gates to the fortress called your qalb and mine are what you think. What are they? In other words, what are the gates that Shaitan uses to enter the fortress called al-qalb? Our desires, our shahawat. Indeed. The ulama put it in the words, our own qualities. I think that's more interesting. صفات الإنسان ذاتها هي الأبواب التي يأتي الشيطان منها ويدخل منها إلى قلوبنا. صفاتنا ذاتها. Our very attributes and qualities, when they are negative, are the gates that Shaitan uses to enter the hearts. Some of those qualities or vices or attributes I mentioned. And we choose to have them, don't we? By cultivating and developing the three lower states of the nafs. And because we choose to have them, in other words, we invite Shaitan inside our qalb. And that is why Allah Azza wa Jal, we understand, said that Shaitan has, in the meaning of the text, إِنَّ عِبَادِي لَيْسَ لَكَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُلْطَانٌ إِلَّا مَنِ اتَّبَعَكَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ. My ibad, underline the word ibad, you Shaitan has no authority over them, except those of them who choose to follow you. Min al-ghawin, that is those who went astray, and therefore who went astray, their lives, their selves were imbalanced. They tilted towards the other lower levels of the nafs, and chose therefore to open their hearts to Shaitan, and then Shaitan finds it open and comes in and resides therein. That is how Shaitan comes into your qalb and mind, by invitation. And the more we continue to develop those negative attributes, those negative akhlaq, the deeper Shaitan will reside in the qalb. And when Shaitan deeply resides in the qalb, then truth becomes falsehood, and falsehood becomes truth, or truth becomes partly falsehood, and falsehood becomes partly truth. Because when the qalb is occupied by Shaitan, when the qalb is veiled, you know what happens? Knowledge is obscured. The system, even the cognitive system, is affected. And our analyses of things, of events, and our judgments are obscured. Rationally speaking. That is why Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. Says Allah Azza wa Jal, establishing a truth here, says, do not obey those of our creatures, those human beings, whose hearts, number one, we have made oblivious to our dhikr. And number two, the one who follows his or her own nafs. Do not obey them. They don't reason right. And this text and other texts, the ulama rahimahumullah conclude that indeed al-dhunub, disobedience of Allah Azza wa Jal, indulging the three lower states of the nafs, obscure our even cognitive abilities, intellectual prowess and clarity, rational judgment. A consequence of developing those three lower states of the nafs. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. The first point is Shaitan keeps residing in the qalb of an individual, or easily attacks the qalb of an individual, even if that person is a mu'min and mashallah his or her khuluq are balanced. If his or her khuluq are balanced, Shaitan still attacks. And Shaitan is able to penetrate in the qalb in moments of ghafla. That's what Allah Azza wa Jal says. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا. The individual whose heart we made oblivious, unaware, negligent of our dhikr. And ghafla is therefore a state of absence of dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. And that is why, in conclusion here, Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma in the tafasir is related to have said in the commentary on the surah that inshallah you all memorize, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ. Al-Waswas Al-Khannas. Who is Al-Waswas Al-Khannas? Shaitan. I seek refuge in Allah from the shar, from the evil of Al-Waswas Al-Khannas. What is Waswas? What is Khannas? Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma is related to have said, أن الشيطان جاثم على قلب ابن آدم. That Shaitan stands on guard, watchful over the heart of the child of Adam. إذا غفل وسوس وإذا ذكر الله تعالى خنس. And that's why he's called waswas khannas. So when the individual is in a state of ghaflah, not in a state of dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, Shaitan attacks. Waswas then comes and suggests and intrigues and obscures and unleashes his legions. But when the abd comes into dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, khannas, then khannas meaning the one who flees and disappears and runs away and turns away. And then once the person is in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, the Shaitan runs away. Developing the akhlaq, the exalted akhlaq of that angelic nafs, bringing it to be developed over the lower states of the self, number one. And that is staying away from al-dhunub and from indulging in that which is displeasing to Allah Azza wa Jal, major level, minor level, and finer minor levels, number one. And keeping the qalb and the tongue in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, briefly said, are the gates by which we enter Jannah, and the means by which we enter Jannah. Otherwise, that nafs is forsaken, and the qalb is forsaken, and the human person is forsaken, and the human family is forsaken, and the human community is forsaken, and the human culture is forsaken, and the human civilization is forsaken. Each one of us must begin there and continue there until hopefully we go to Allah Azza wa Jal at an individual level first and then at a community level thereafter, with a qalb that is in a state of balance, or at least close to that, insha'Allah ta'ala. These are the essential elements, if you will, of the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, which we must admit have been totally forsaken or greatly forsaken in a world that is very materialistically attractive and dangerously attractive. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم، فإن قلت صوابا فمن الله وحده، وإن قلت غير ذلك فمن نفسي ومن جهلي ومن الشيطان، أعوذ بالله أن أذكر به وأنساه. Had I said anything correct, it's from Allah Azza wa Jalla alone. Anything improper or incorrect, Allah and His Rasul are absolved from that. It is only due to my nafs, my ignorance, and shaitan. I seek refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal that I remind you of Him, yet I myself forget Him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. If there is time, yes. Is there time for questions? How much? Until how much? I thought you had until 11:45. Alhamdulillah.